welcome to Empowering Small Businesses, the Stop at Nothing campaign in association with CNBC TV 18 and Moneycontrol. And I'm your host, Ruchira Sharma. This is a part of the Challengers MSME Summit brought to you by Dell Technologies, an initiative to enable and empower the small and medium businesses and enable them to scale up and pivot to growth. While small businesses are extremely crucial catalysts that drive the country's economy, they also face multiple and some very unique challenges. So, in this series of conversations with domain experts and industry leaders, we attempt to decode and demystify the challenges and obstacles in the path of small businesses. And the topic for today is, are small businesses adopting cybersecurity best practices? So today we have a very special panel with us, and let me begin by introducing them. We have with us Mr. Ajit Pillai, Regional Director, APAC, Morphisec. Mr.
Hi,
Ranjit,
everyone.
Mr. Ranjit Bellary, Associate Partner, Forensic and Integrity Services, Ernst & Young.
Hey everyone.
Mr. Raj Sivaraju, President, APAC, RTA.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Ruchirat, for having me on board.
Great to have you here with us, sir. And Mr. Adnan Aloui, Sales Engineering Director, Small Businesses, EMEA and APJ, Dell Technologies.
Hello. Glad to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. It's great to have you here. And like I said earlier, cybersecurity is a very critical economic and national security challenge that we face as a nation. And companies, whether small or big, they need to reduce the risk to potential threats when it comes to cybersecurity. And research has shown that small and medium businesses are involved in more than 43% of overall data breaches. And in fact, 61% of small businesses had reported at least one attack within the last 12 months. So, Mr. Ajit, I'd like to address this question to you. As small businesses embrace digitization and they connect virtually with their consumers and their clients, they are experiencing various threats and cyber attacks. So, what are the various cybersecurity concerns that they need to be aware of?
So there are two angles to it. Thank you for asking us. One is they need to really understand what kind of risks are being there. That's one part. And the other side is what are the basic musts which are required in the business practices broadly. So it is a myth that many of them have that all these kind of cyber attacks are intended only to enterprises and not to SMBs. So the awareness has been very, very less. So first and foremost is they need to be aware of both sides. And we all know that security incidents will inevitably occur. And that's a kind of an awareness which has come today generally across. And incidents mainly will have some kind of an impact. And in small businesses, it really hits their bottom lines when you compare with enterprises. So there are multiple things to be done from a technology side, from a practice side. And what I would advocate is awareness is important and you need to be kept abreast with what has been happening. Then we can look at multiple ways how to augment that.
Certainly. Thank you for sharing that insight there, Mr. Ajit. Coming to you, Mr. Ranjit, what are the things, according to you, that small businesses need to know to have a proactive approach towards cybersecurity?
Sure. Thank you, Ruchira. So I think at the minimum, they need to understand what is critical for them as an organization in terms of data, right? I think more and more the attacks that we are seeing, the primary motive of the attackers is to use the most critical data in an organization, whether it is their financial data, whether it is their personal data of their customers, whether it is any intellectual property data, or whether it is, let's say, there are organizations who are serving healthcare, large healthcare organization in terms of patient information, right? So this is, I think, at the basic minimum they need to have, right? And they need to look at all this information, not just in silos, but technically look at all the information that is more important to them as an organization, have controls in place to safeguard the data, and ensure that they are at least having the basic minimum security controls in place. They did not have the advanced security controls like the large organizations have, right? they should at least look at the bare minimum, what is important to them as an organization, and start putting controls in place so that they are able to safeguard this data.
Sure. Mr. Raj, I'd like to come to you for the next question. Trust is at stake here. If a customer database is breached, then customers obviously will not trust a company, knowing that it has been a victim of malpractices. So, yet looking at all this, SMB owners often do not count cybersecurity as a core competency. So, what consequences will a company face in such a scenario, and how can that be prevented?
Ruchira, based on what we are seeing, particularly from an Arete perspective, we are handling anywhere between 80 to 100 cases every single month. So that should tell you the kind of the depth of the situation in itself. From a consequence perspective, it is extremely important that the small and medium businesses are aware that it's not just about IT infrastructure not being available. There are many other consequences which directly impact them, right from intellectual property theft to their brand impact, their customers get information getting lost or unavailable. All of these different impacts may lead to a lot of lawsuits or even sanctions, and therefore, while the impact in their opinion might be only on their infrastructure, there's a much larger impact that each of these SMBs have to keep in mind.
All right, great. Coming to you, Mr. Adnan, what is your insight here? How do you think small businesses can prepare to tackle this kind of a scenario? And also, what are the consequences you feel that they tend to face when there is a cybersecurity breach, especially in terms of their customers?
Thank you, Ruchira. Yeah, I think today we see more and more small businesses are doing business online, and the pandemic has accelerated that behavior. And the more you get online, the more open to attacks and risks, right? You put your data online, you put your applications online, and you have more risks. And small businesses, they have worse consequences versus large businesses. Large businesses can survive if they're attacked. Small businesses sometimes may even cost them to go out of business, right? Because they're small. So the consequences are huge. They can go from financial risks, losing data, to, as I said, even going out of business. And as Raj and Ranjit mentioned, legal consequences, lawsuits, and small businesses cannot afford to do that. So, and losing, small businesses have a very limited number of customers, and losing trust, customer trust, is everything that they own. And if they lose that trust, and if they lose that limited set of number of customers, they're gonna lose their business and go out of business. So I think the first thing, small businesses, they have to run an assessment to understand what would a cyber attack or security breach would cost them. What type of data they need to assess the data, they need to assess the gaps, and make sure they understand exactly what would be the consequences, whether it's financially or legally. I think the first thing is an assessment.
Sure.
Ruchira, I totally agree with Adnan. Just
Yes.
a quick point that I'd like to add. For small businesses, while even recovery could still be possible, like what Adnan was mentioning, the cost of recovery and the impact to the brand is far larger when compared to larger organizations. And therefore, it is important that they really take this very seriously.
Absolutely, and that actually brings me to my next point. Mr. Ajit, I'd like to come to you for that. As both of them mentioned, small businesses, they wear many hats, but a professional of a cybersecurity breach is not or may not be one of them. But criminals find small businesses more vulnerable. So, how do you think we can overcome this cannot happen to us kind of an approach? And what is the core problem here?
See, first and foremost, as I said when I started, SMBs and small business have a myth that it is the enterprise. But when you really look at across, many of them are really getting affected. They are part of the whole thing. So when you go a little bit deeper into the risks, many of them has been mentioned here. Of course, they would be dealing with business plans, financial information, intellectual property, etc., and it goes on. Their repute is at stake. So, what are the core things? What they need to really look at is, from a technology standpoint, they need to do certain basics. First and foremost is, yes, of course, an assessment is important. You get to really understand the gaps. We need to have basics like updating your softwares regularly. Creating some requires some strong passwords. These are, because always there has been a pushback to SMB when it comes to security. It's all about, do we have the budgets to actually do this? Do we
Absolutely.
really need to do this? And that's their biggest challenge. No matter you talk about technology, people, etc. So I would recommend that they should have some basic musts in their business practice. First is, of course, I talked about updating the softwares regularly. They need to look at adopting strong passwords. Maybe if they could also get into some kind of multi-factor authentication. And above all, is to train everyone in identifying, reporting simple things like phishing emails. Then the bottom line is to create a cybersecurity plan. There you could have all the angles: the people, technology, your threat, etc., etc. That's what I would like to say.
Great, very pertinent point made over there by Mr. Ranjit. Ranjit, coming to you, do you think there is enough awareness of cyber attacks in the small and medium businesses? And if they continue to believe that their business is not going to be prone to cyber attack, then they are unlikely to invest in the right solutions. So, how does one really break this perception barrier?
Sure. If 2 years back you would have asked me this question, I would have said, yeah, absolutely, there's no awareness, right? But I think small businesses have probably learned the hard way after they've been hit with cyber attacks, right? So I'm sure there is much more awareness and probably much more focus, at least at the CXO levels, that cybersecurity is an important aspect that they all need to look at. And technically, I think I would say today they are probably looking at much more seriously than I would say they would have looked at it maybe a couple of years back, right? Now, having said that, I think there is still a perception that being a small business, maybe we are not that much prone to cyber attacks, right? However, when we look at the latest statistics, I would say in the last year, especially in 2021, at least more than 70% of the businesses, 70% of the attacks were on small and medium businesses compared to large, businesses. Primarily because hackers are well aware that I think small businesses probably look at cybersecurity. Maybe it starts with a firewall and maybe ends with I would say, an antivirus solution, which is the bare minimum, right? And that particular perception is where a lot of hackers think that okay, obviously there is no cybersecurity controls, advanced controls in place, so it's easy for me to get into this organization and get all the data out, right? So I think that perception has always been there, but of course the perception has changed much more now, and I would say there is much more focus, at least on the broader CXO levels, even in mid-sized or small-sized businesses, that cybersecurity needs to be taken pretty seriously. And I'm sure, I think, apart from the awareness, I think they are also putting in plans in place. Of course, more needs to be done, but that's something I think I'm sure a lot of stakeholders within the industry and within the regulatory community are trying to spread more and more awareness through, I would say, either through these sessions or maybe educating mid-sized and small-sized businesses. Of course, the regulatory push is also there with privacy laws coming up in various regions. So I think the focus is definitely there.
Great. And actually, that reminded me of a report I recently read that while big enterprises have more data to steal, small businesses are definitely more vulnerable because, as you said, they do not consider cybersecurity a core competency and they'd rather invest in other operational issues. So clearly, they are more vulnerable to the attackers. Coming to you, Mr. Adnan, hacks can take different shapes and forms, from a simple virus to a massive data breach. And yet, only half of business owners say that they have set up business practices that can really protect their confidential data. Most small businesses do not have the resources or the manpower really to deal with the evolving threat landscape. So, how can tech companies design solutions that are tailor made for the small and medium businesses?
Thank you for the question. Yes, there are a lot of things that we can do, and as Dell Technologies, and I represent Dell Technologies, we have done a lot. Number one, as I think Ajit mentioned, awareness and education is very important, because when it comes to security, no matter how many technologies and products and solutions you put out there, if customers are not aware and not educated and not using it, then it's not going to work. And small businesses, when they plan their business, they put their business plan and they go into business, and they put their budgets. Security is the last thing they budget for, because they believe they're small. They just need technology to go and get going. And because they don't have an army of engineers, and because they don't understand security technology, they put it last until they get attacked. And also, as you mentioned, many small businesses, they believe that they're not going to get attacked because they're small. And also, you mentioned that more than 60% have experienced some attacks, and that's what we hear from our customers, right? 50% they believe they will never get attacked, but at the same time, 60% they get attacked, right? And the cost is, it goes from 100K to millions to going out of business, right? Losing your business, losing your customers. So number one, as I said, it's education awareness. What we're doing in this seminars and workshops is very important. Educating the customers, training the customers, and also customers, they have to train their own employees, because security should be considered as a 360, as a problem that can be coming from everywhere. That's not just the soft security, updating the applications and endpoints. It's also simple, as many of the panels mentioned, updating your password, locking your laptop, right? It's just simple practices that small businesses they don't take seriously. Small businesses, they deal with third party and partners. And most of the time, those partners, they have access to all the tools, right? Or even when employees leave the company, small businesses, they don't cut their access automatically, because they don't have well-defined processes to do that. Big businesses, they have well-defined processes. So from the technology, as I said, awareness, education is very important. White papers, sharing best practices, what other companies are doing, what other customers are doing. In terms of technology, big vendors like Dell and others, we take security very seriously, and we embed security in all the components and the products that we do. Just simple things like, making sure security is in the firmware and the drivers, locking the firmwares to make sure that intruders cannot change the firmware or change the signature, detecting problems when they happen, and reporting on those. So many things that we're doing, including data protection, to make sure that customers can back up their data in case they have a problem. They can always recover and go back to a good backup data, replicating the data to a secure site, second site, or even a third site. So there are many things that we do, but it needs to start with education, awareness, assessment, sharing best practices, and it goes all the way to the security that we embed in our technology end to end.
Great. So clearly a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach to security is critical. But coming to you, Raj, many SMBs also feel that they do not have the resources or the manpower to deal with the threat landscape that we're currently in. So what is your insight here? How can companies design solutions that are particularly meant for this sector?
I think, Ruchira, the current environment and the landscape from a cybersecurity perspective has evolved and continuously evolving. Many of the solution providers are looking at SMB as a priority area for them. They are designing a lot of solutions, keeping in mind the kind of resources that may be available for this SMB industry, SMB verticals. And so there are solutions that are not just tailor-made, but also resource-friendly for the SMBs, whether from a technology perspective or even from a resource and human resources perspective. For example, one of the services that not just our organization, but few other organizations have already started is something called the virtual CISOs. Now, as you can imagine, a small and medium company, it will be extremely difficult for them to put an individual at a CXO level primarily for cybersecurity. And therefore, to take that weight away from the small and medium organizations, there's a offering called virtual CISOs that has come up, which can help you have a very experienced CISO on your board advising you and directing you, but at the same time, you don't have to dig deep into your pockets as well. These sort of solutions are available in the market, and at the same time, there are solutions where you have the cybersecurity personnel made available on a temp basis, so they can come in, look at your security postures, advise you in strengthening and implementing some of the security protocols, which will strengthen your overall security standards. So I think as a cybersecurity industry, we all have woken up to the fact that yes, we have very large companies market, but we also have a much larger small and medium businesses, which we all should be addressing, because at the end of the day, commercials are important, but at the same
Absolutely.
time, we want to make sure that we are responding to the cyber threats that are there and keeping all of the companies and particularly the livelihoods of people intact. And so there are a lot of solutions available. I would encourage all of the small and medium businesses to start looking out and putting their efforts in earnest, and they will find solutions.
Great. That's very heartening to know that. But a lot of small businesses are actually tempted to go for pirated software just to cut costs. But that actually increases the risk of cyber attacks. So, what is your insight here?
Yes, you absolutely touched the nerve here. The biggest issue, which has always been that small and medium, they had a feeling that they are never going to be hacked. You just have to get work done, whether it is pirated or not. First and foremost, there are two sides to it. One is many of them, when they look at security, they look at it more from a compliance perspective. If someone is driving something very hard on them, if they are part of a financial industry, and they have this financial must they need to have, they look at it from a compliance standpoint. Today, after all these attacks, especially as many of the panelists said, in the last 2 years, because of this pandemic, they have really understood that they have been prone to all these kinds of attacks. So what I would say is that I did touch upon this earlier and said that people should look at those must five, from a business perspective. You need to keep updating your softwares regularly. You need to look at security more from a proactive perspective. And some of the panelists did say that they start using a firewall, they feel that they are completely secure, and then they do some authentication and they feel they are secure. But we all know that incidents will happen, and they need to have a security plan. And for them, the first best way to start is to look at an assessment. And when it comes to really money, we've got a lot of options available today, and they need to look at it. Like, for a simple example, your own Windows software has got multiple native security controls, which people could start from there. And you don't need to add on more gear. Yes, it will be good. You can look at security in depth. So my input to the SME market would be to start looking at creating a cybersecurity plan with your current infrastructure. Do an assessment and start grading it up.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ajit. I'd like to bring you in here, Anand. Is it the mindset where cybersecurity costs are considered optional in comparison to other imperatives like marketing, operations, or equipment buying? And how can we break this?
Yes, absolutely. You're 100% right. Especially for small businesses, right? They want to be quick. They want to get into the business. They have a short-term plan, and as you mentioned, they spend money on marketing and CRM, getting in touch with customers, and the minimum technology that they need to get going and start driving business, right? And security is often put on the side burner, right? And As we mentioned, and the panelists mentioned, number one, it's awareness. We need to continue to educate our customers, and make sure that they're aware that the security is just as important as anything else, as the business plan, as the good idea that you have as an entrepreneur, small business, as customers, as anything else. Because once you get attacked, you lose everything, right? So we need to make sure that they understand that, right? Number two, assessment. I know security costs lots of money. Having a CISO, it costs a lot of money. Sometimes you can't even find them because we don't have enough of them. Even big companies cannot find them. But make sure that you put budget aside to do at least one assessment a year, right? And the panelists mentioned there are virtual CISOs, there are consultants that can do that for you, and there are many ways to find budget for that. Some governments, they can help small businesses, and then there are different options. But make sure you do an assessment at least once a year, once every couple of years, to understand exactly what would cost you in case you got attacked. What are the gaps? What are the simple things that the company should do, right? I mean, we all talked about simple things, just securing your password, for example, and making sure that people accessing through VPN remotely, especially that many of the businesses now, they have people working from anywhere, working remotely. So I would say, continue to educate our customers. They need to spend time and money into security and to do an assessment. And in terms of technology is well advanced, right? And the vendors are doing, we mentioned software vendors, the hardware vendors, they're all doing their best to make sure that their technology is secure. The issue updates, they monitor the technology, but the hackers are advanced as well, right? Because they're using the same technology, right? So there should be a proactive approach. It's not a reactive approach, because you're always going to be racing the hackers, and not only the technology, but as we mentioned, should be at 360 degrees, end to end, looking at every angle and starting with the basics, right? That's what I would say.
Okay, great. Thank you for those insights there. Coming to you, Mr. Raj, with the growing rate of data breaches, phishing schemes, and other cyber attacks emerging from, especially post the pandemic, companies can no longer ignore this threat. And yet, a cyber attack typically complicates business in various ways, like operation, market perception, and of course, legal and financial. So, do you have some examples or some numbers that you'd like to share with us to understand the extent of impact on small businesses?
Absolutely, Ruchira. And this is what we do for our living. We respond to cyber attacks on a day in and day out basis. We are seeing a very, very high growth of increase in the number of attacks. Just in the Indian landscape, we are seeing that there's at least about 300% increase in the number of attacks year on year. We are seeing that ransomware continues to be the leading cyber attack mechanism that the threat actors are using to try and target these small and medium and even large organizations. While today it is also gone to a point where ransomware has become a software on service kind of a model. And therefore, there's a lot of emphasis that we are putting on to try and handle these situations in a very timely fashion. At the same time, we're also working with a lot of the companies to be prepared. In fact, you'd be interested to know that we actually run simulations to help companies prepare for eventuality, because like some of the panelists have said, it is not the question of if, it's only a question of when. And we would like for all of the organizations to be prepared when that situation arrives. We are seeing that from an overall industry perspective, healthcare continues to be a very critical industry that a lot of the threat actors are focusing on. We're looking at professional services organizations that about 83% of the attacks in the small and medium market, we are seeing that professional service companies are being attacked. Manufacturing also is continuing to be on the top 3 or 5 industry sectors that are getting impacted today from not just the ransomware, but even business email compromise, network intrusions, IP thefts. So these are the kind of incidents that we are seeing in the market.
Mhm.
We have been working with a lot of our partners and clients to help them be more prepared to handle these situations.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing those numbers there. Mr. Ranjit, data cooperation can generate business opportunities, but while collaborating and monetizing data, a business is also susceptible to privacy breaches. So, how does one really achieve or perfect the balancing act, and how can one leverage new technology while safeguarding data and their intellectual property?
Sure. So again, I think you bring a very important point in terms of when you look at security, should you only look at information security, or should you look at your entire data landscape and understand how do you really want to safeguard, not just from a security standpoint, how do you want to at one side you also have to secure your data. Second is you also have to use this data to ensure that you're generating valuable business insights so that it really helps your business, right? More from a futuristic perspective, right? So I feel data governance is one such important aspect that while a lot of large organizations have already started using this particular process to look at holistically what kind of data they are collecting, how they are collecting, what kind of data is getting stored in their organization, who all have access to the data, right? Um, Holistically, I think even small and mid-sized businesses, I think it's easy for them to sort of look at data governance, start looking at how they can put up maybe a policy in place to understand how the data should be managed within the organization, what is the critical data they have, and how the data is being managed currently. Let's say if the data is being sort of spread across different functions, make sure proper access controls are existing, and only the people who should have access to the particular data should get access to the data, right? And finally, I think data disposition, right? While you also have to ensure your data is being protected, at the same time there's a lot of junk or what you call it as unwanted data, right, which typically loses business value beyond a certain period of time, right? How this data can be properly disposed of, right? Because oftentimes what we've also seen is organizations have been hit with cyber attacks for trying to have unwanted data in some particular corner of their organization and not being properly protected. So hackers have typically got into the company's network through this channel, right? So it's very important for them to ensure there is a sound data disposition mechanism in place as well, and the overall data governance is properly being managed. And it's a continuous process, right? It's not as if you put controls in place today and forget. It needs to be continuously monitored. It needs to be continuously focused, so that I think just like you're trying to take care of your health and doing a regular health checkup, data hygiene is, I think, equally important.
Absolutely. Security is definitely no longer about just protecting data and keeping hackers out of our systems. It is a lot more. Mr. Ajit, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, absolutely. I'm in line with what has been spoken here. From a data side, of course, what is visible is data. And that's when what is visible you need to take care. And then you go a step behind and you got multiple solutions to take care. But what is important is we come down and see we have got so many solutions for data protection today, from ELP to DRM, you say it, and this is what pushes the SMB back and says that, look, you've got so many solutions, where do you start with? And today, the data security market has come back and said that we need to understand where your data is residing, as one of the panelists was saying. So it is important that awareness of your data in your system is important, number one. Number two, how do you handle this data in a proper way? Because in the Indian context, you don't have a strong, data privacy regulation which is in place. People are not serious, but I think it should come anytime. The moment it starts coming in, then people would start putting, because in the Indian context, compliance drives security the most, unless and until someone is really breached, and that's the general sentiments across.
All right.
And Ruchira, if I may add,
yeah, sure. Absolutely. Go ahead.
What we are seeing is the amount of data that is getting generated. It doesn't matter what size of the company. there's a huge amount of data that is getting generated. The organizations are not putting their effort and the resources to categorize the data in the right way. If you really look at the crown jewels, if you will, of an organization, it may be 30 to 40% of the data only. But they're having to, because when they generate so much of data and they have to look at data security, they think that having security being implemented across, it just seems so much more cumbersome and so much more big. So I
Definitely.
think, like what our panelists were saying, it is extremely important that you not only look at cybersecurity, but also look at data categorization as a very important aspect so that you can try and identify your crown jewels much early and try and secure them and put a perimeter around them so that it's a more focused approach from a security perspective.
Correct.
Definitely. So it is critical for companies to identify their critical data assets or the crown jewels, as you mentioned. One last question before we wrap up, and this is for you, Mr. Adnan. We cannot not talk about the work from anywhere culture, given the post-pandemic situation. So, how are companies like yours extending protection and support against cyber attacks in the given work from anywhere kind of culture?
Definitely today. So we see more and more employees working from anywhere, not just from home. And I think this is going to be the new normal, right? I'm working from home, and many of us working from home now, and I think we're going to do this for many years to come, right? And companies like ours are putting together an end-to-end security solutions to allow companies to protect their data, protect their assets against attackers, especially when employees are working from home, working from cafes, working from anywhere, right? Endpoint solutions, DPI firewalls, VPN. But as the panelists mentioned, so there are two angles, right? Number one, it's all the technology to protect yourself from VPN and DPI solutions to firewalls, to software and malware software to protect against viruses. But also, you need to make sure that every company is going to be attacked at some point. We say more than 60%, but that number might get to 70, 80%. And you need to put together a plan to recover in case of an attack. So data protection, the panelists have mentioned, data protection is very important. Not only protecting and backing up your data, but also testing the backup and make sure that you can recover in case of an attack. So protecting your data, backing up your data, especially the critical data, and doing frequent tests to make sure that in case you get attacked, you recover 100%, and you get back on business safely, right, without losing data. So I think protecting yourself, but also making sure you're backing up your data, you're testing, and you can recover in case of an attack, because we have to assume that every company may be attacked at any certain point.
All right. So just one last question. We're wrapping up now. Just your closing comments. One line advice that you'd like to give small businesses from your own learnings and experience. We can start with you, Mr. Ajit.
So modern threats require modern technology, and you need to be actually kept abreast with what's been happening right across, so that you can keep augmenting your practices, your technology on a regular basis. It not necessarily means that you have to shell out a lot of money for this, but it is about fine-tuning your own practices and creating a real plan phase-wise so that you have a secure digital environment. That's it for me.
Sure. Thank you so much. And Mr. Ajit, what is your advice to small business owners?
So I would say don't look at security as purely as a compliance. Look at it as part of your business day to day, where you have to be if you have to be in business, then you have to ensure that you're looking at security seriously. I would say end user awareness is a very critical factor. Oftentimes we see small businesses don't investing a lot in training their employees. So I think that's really an important factor, I would say, and I think they should definitely look at ensuring it's a continuous process.
All right. Mr. Adnan and Mr. Raj, your closing comments.
Yeah, I would say definitely start with training and awareness and making sure that your employees understand the risk of security, and then start with an assessment. And it doesn't have to cost you a lot. Start with an assessment to understand exactly what are the risks, what are the gaps, and then implement. Start with the basic stuff. You don't have to implement everything, but at least you're aware of the gaps and start by implementing the basic stuff. And the last thing, data protection. Data protection is very important because you're gonna be attacked. But you get attacked, you recover 100%. So protect your data, back up your data, test your backup regularly to make sure that at any given time you can recover 100%.
All right. And Mr. Raj, your advice to small business owners?
Though we call it cybersecurity, it starts with the users. So like the panelist said, obviously you have to look at overall, for user training for sure, but be prepared for it because it is coming and each one of us will be impacted. So the better you're prepared, the easier your response to it. And there are a lot of solutions available in the market.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your insights. And as you all pointed out, clearly small businesses need to prioritize and then reprioritize their cybersecurity practices and make sure that they leverage new technology to overcome this hurdle. Thank you so much to all of you, and thank you to our audience for watching.